Hello and welcome along to the latest instalment of the ICT video blog series. Dave Robson here again today, and today we're going to have a look at compliance issues. So I'm joined by Jonathan Bowdler, who's the Global Head of Compliance at ICT. Hi Jonathan.
Hi David.
So we're going to have a look at an enforcement action that happened recently in the UK, and it's to do with Invesco Perpetual, who were fined £18.5 million for exposing investors to greater levels of risk than they'd been led to expect. So, Jonathan, could you talk us through this and say sort of exactly where did Invesco go wrong?
Well, there were three main breaches that Invesco managed to commit. The main one, first of all, the rule breach, was the breach in investment fund limits. There were certain rules set out in terms of what type of fund insurance and investment firms can invest in, and they exceeded the limits that are set out within the rulebook. Now, those limits are there to protect customers from certain risk. So the second issue that arose was it was also found that they were using products, derivative products, to leverage the investments, and they were not disclosing this information to their customers. So again, there was a customer issue here in that customers were actually investing in higher risk products than they had been led to believe. And then thirdly, they also failed to have the appropriate systems and controls in place internally to ensure that they were actually monitoring these risks and again complying with certain disclosure requirements. And this led to long periods, for example, where certain trades were not registered, and it was actually impossible to be sure of the closing price and values of trades that they were completing. Now, overall, the effect of this was they were exposing their customers to greater risks than they had been led to believe. And as a consequence, although there were no actual losses to customers, because any of the losses that Invesco did find that arose from this way in which they proceeded in this case, they absorbed themselves, and there were over £5 million of losses that they had to absorb. They were still found in breach for the potential losses that customers were put at risk at. And so therefore they breached Principle 3, which is the systems and controls breach, and they also breached Principle 7, which is the clear, fair and not misleading communications to customers.
Right, okay, so there's a few interesting details in that case then, and certainly a few things that people need to be aware of if you're practitioners out there and you're worried about mitigating this sort of risk yourself. So how might other firms or other professionals react to this, Jonathan? What are the main takeaways?
Well, it's another interesting case from the FCA in that they are here taking action against a firm for potential consumer detriment. There is no consumer detriment in this case, so therefore part of the mitigation that Invesco had to go through did not include in this case compensating customers or putting customers back in the position they would have been, which historically has usually been one of the outcomes of enforcement cases. So again, what it demonstrates here is that the regulators are being much more proactive in identifying potential customer detriment. There are still actual breaches. The CISC breach cost Invesco internally $5 million, and it was a breach of Principle 3. And the clear, fair, not misleading. There were breaches in the documentation that they were giving to customers and failing to disclose to them. So the breaches existed, and therefore the enforcement action could go ahead. But again, interestingly, because there was no customer detriment, it was really a case of Invesco themselves internally identifying the issues and informing the regulator, and then the subsequent investigation from the FCA identifying a few more issues. So overall, the key thing to take away from this again is the FCA have told us they're going to be more invasive and more proactive, and this is a good example of them going down that route, and it demonstrates to us working within the industry that we therefore have to take the same approach if we're going to deal with this. So compliance functions need to be addressing potential risks, potential breaches, and mitigating those risks and breaches before they materialise. Because it's not just a case of them materialising and us ending up in enforcement action. The fact that they exist in potential also means we could be going into enforcement action ourselves.
Okay, well, obviously some really interesting and really sort of heavy hitting stuff in there. Again, also goes to show the importance of other compliance professionals reviewing what the regulator are putting out in terms of enforcement actions against other firms.
Absolutely.
So thanks very much for that, Jonathan, and we'll see you again next time.
Thanks. Cheerio.